My phone buzzed in the pocket of my worn-out jacket, a short vibration that made my heart sink. I sat in the old armchair in my cramped kitchen, the weak fluorescent light flickering overhead. The screen lit up with a stark message: insufficient funds to pay the utility bill for 142 Maple Street. I stared at it, a familiar bitter pang rising in my chest. It wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. The bill wasn't for me. It was for the house on the outskirts of Topeka where my parents still lived, where my childhood with Ryan was woven into golden summer days and freezing winter nights. I'm Nolan Walker, 33, a plumber in Topeka, Kansas. My life is nothing extraordinary. I live alone in a small rented apartment in an old neighborhood near downtown, where the cobblestone streets are cracked and the faint smell of old paint lingers in the air. My apartment is tiny. Just enough space for a single bed, a chipped wooden table, and a kitchen corner cluttered with repair tools. Every day I wake at 5 a.m., drive my beat-up truck to job sites, fix leaking pipes, replace valves, or handle issues people ignore until they become problems. My income covers rent, gas, and some groceries, but most of it flows elsewhere, to the house on Maple Street. Maple Street is where I grew up, where childhood memories remain vivid as if they happened yesterday. That old wooden house with its rusted tin roof and peeling walls is all my parents have. My father, Micah Walker, 63, was once a tractor repairman, a tough, prideful man, almost stubbornly so. He always wore faded flannel shirts, his hands calloused from a lifetime of work. But 10 years ago, a workplace accident stole his health. A faulty tractor left him with a broken femur and a damaged spine. Since then, he's been retired, living on a meager pension and me. He used to be proud of me, calling me the man of the family. But in recent years, his gaze has shifted. Cold, sometimes harsh, as if his dependence on me is a stain on his pride. My mother, Paisley, 59, is a gentle but fragile woman. She has a sad smile, her eyes always holding a faint glimmer of hope for a better life. She used to work at a grocery store, sewing late into the night to earn extra money, but the grind has worn her down. She's always dreamed of our family making it big. And in that dream, she placed all her faith in Ryan, my younger brother, whom she believed would achieve something great. Ryan, 27, is a different story. Smart, quick-witted, and gifted with a silver tongue that makes people trust him. He studied business in college, but was never truly serious. Spoiled by our parents from a young age, Ryan became entitled. He racked up debts for investments in vague projects, lost money, and turned to me to bail him out. To him, my help was a given, as if I was born to clean up his messes. I don't resent him, not because I don't want to, but because I can't. To me, family is everything, even if it feels like a weight pressing down on my shoulders every day. For the past 10 years, I've covered nearly all the family's expenses. Medication for my father, hospital bills when my mother collapsed from exhaustion, roof repairs when rain leaked through, and Ryan's tuition and debts. I can't remember the last time I bought something for myself. A new pair of shoes, a meal at a restaurant, a trip to unwind. Those are luxuries I can't afford. I once had a chance for a promotion at the plumbing company, a regional manager position. But I turned it down because it required relocating and I couldn't leave my family behind. Personal relationships faded too. I dated a woman, Sarah, a few years ago, but she left when she realized I couldn't make time for anyone but my family. My parents used to say I was their pride. My mother would hug me, her voice trembling. "Nolan, you're the most dutiful son," her eyes glistening as I handed over money to fix the old heater in the house. My father, a man of few words, would pat my shoulder and say, "When we're gone, this house will be yours. You deserve it all." That promise was written in an old will my mother kept carefully in the dining room drawer. I never cared about inheritance, but that piece of paper gave my sacrifices meaning. A silent thread tying me to them, to the old house on Maple Street. But now, sitting in my cramped kitchen, staring at the phone's notification, I felt only exhaustion. Not resentment, not anger, but a deep, bone-weary fatigue, as if my entire body was sinking into a dark pool. I've done everything for them. Dad, Mom, Ryan. Not out of duty, but because it's the only way I know to feel I still have a family to care for. Yet every time I check my bank balance, every time another bill arrives, I ask myself, what am I doing with my life? The next morning, a rare Sunday off, I was jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. It was my mother, her voice trembling, not with the usual worry, but with an unfamiliar excitement. "Nolan, come to the house right now. It's huge." She spoke quickly, almost shouting, then hung up before I could ask anything. I sat up, my mind foggy. Huge. In my family, huge usually meant another bill, one of Ryan's debts, or yet another repair for the old house. I sighed, threw on my worn jacket, and drove to Maple Street. When I arrived, the small street was buzzing. Neighbors gathered in the front yard, their laughter and chatter filling the air, some snapping photos with their phones. A news van from the local paper was parked by the gate, and a reporter was interviewing my mother with a microphone. Mom, in her faded floral dress with her hair neatly tied back, was smiling so brightly I barely recognized her. Dad stood beside her, his back slightly hunched but his eyes gleaming, as if he'd rediscovered the man he was 10 years ago. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, a smug grin on his face, as if he were the center of all the attention. "Nolan," Mom cried out when she saw me, rushing over to throw her arms around me. "You won't believe it. We won the lottery. $10 million, Nolan. 10 million. She grabbed my hands, tears sparkling in her eyes. Not from worry this time, but from joy. I stood frozen, trying to process the news. $10 million? For our family, that number was like a dream. Dad approached, clapping me hard on the shoulder. "Good, right, son? We're finally free from this miserable life." I smiled genuinely. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift. I thought of the bills that would no longer haunt us, of Mom not having to sew through the night, of Dad getting his medications without me scrambling to cover the cost. "I'm happy for you," I said, my voice hoarse. "Really." And I meant it. In that moment, I saw our family as it used to be. The days we huddled under blankets to stay warm. When Dad told stories about his time on the farm. When Mom sang lullabies to Ryan. I thought maybe we'd finally be okay. But that joy didn't last long. Within weeks, the atmosphere in the family shifted. The money arrived, and with it came whispers, plans, and a change in how my parents looked at me. Ryan, as always, became the center of every conversation. He talked about investment opportunities, on doubling the money and building a business empire. Mom listened, her eyes shining as if Ryan were a genius. Dad, though quieter, nodded along, trusting in his youngest son's vision. I sat through the rare family dinners at Maple Street, listening to Ryan ramble about the stock market, real estate, and things I didn't understand. "Nolan, what do you think?" Mom asked once, her eyes hopeful. I stopped chewing, set my fork down, and searched for the gentlest words. "I think we should be careful. This is a lot of money, but it can disappear fast if we don't manage it right. Maybe put it in the bank or hire a professional financial advisor." I looked at Dad, hoping he'd agree. He used to be cautious, always teaching me that easy come, easy go. But Dad just snorted, his eyes cold. "Careful? Nolan, you're always just careful. Ryan understands the times better than you. He's got a business degree, you fix pipes." His words cut like a knife, sharp and unexpected. I fell silent, feeling something stripped away. Mom quickly tried to smooth things over. "Nolan, that's not what Dad meant. It's just, Ryan has big ideas, you know." But I knew. Her gaze had shifted to Ryan as if I were an outsider. From then on, things changed faster than I could have imagined. Ryan convinced my parents to let him manage the entire lottery winnings. He rented a small office in downtown Topeka, calling himself an investor, and started spending as if the money would never run out. My parents, instead of questioning him, were proud. "Ryan will take our family to new heights," Mom said, her voice full of conviction. I tried to offer advice a few more times, but each time, I got head shakes or veiled comments about being too conservative or lacking ambition. Ryan was worse. Once he looked at me with a smirk. "You stick to fixing pipes, big brother. Leave the big stuff to me." I didn't argue. I've never been good at arguing with family. But every time I left Maple Street, I felt smaller, as if my place in the family was fading. Then one day, Mom called me to the house, her voice serious. "Nolan, come for dinner tonight. We have something important to discuss." I agreed, though a sinking feeling stirred in my gut. When I stepped into the Maple Street house, the smell of roasted meat and cornbread, my childhood favorites, filled the air, but the atmosphere was oppressively heavy. Dad sat at the head of the table, his face stern. Mom busied herself serving food, but her eyes avoided mine. Ryan was absent, which made me even more uneasy. Dinner began in silence. I tried to make conversation, asking about Dad's health, about the little garden Mom had started, but their responses were mere grunts. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and pushed his plate aside. "Nolan," he said, his voice low but cold, "we need to talk about the family's future." He reached into the dining room drawer and pulled out an old, yellowed piece of paper neatly folded. My heart pounded. I recognized it instantly. The will Mom had shown me years ago, promising that the Maple Street house, everything they had, would be mine. Dad placed it on the table in front of me, but his eyes held no warmth. "This is the old will," he said, his tone chillingly calm. "We've thought long and hard, and we've made a new one. From now on, everything, this house, the assets, will go to Ryan." I felt the blood drain from my body. I stared at the paper, its familiar creases, the handwritten lines Mom had once shown me with pride. "You're our pride, Nolan," she'd said. But now she sat there, head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. "Nolan," she whispered, "you're grown. You can take care of yourself. Ryan, he needs this chance more." "Ryan needs this chance?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What about me? What have I done for this family for the past 10 years? I didn't shout, but my voice was louder than I intended. Dad frowned, his eyes sharp. "Don't make this difficult, Nolan. You're the eldest. You should understand. Ryan has vision. You're fine." "Fine?" That word hit me like a punch to the face. I stood, my hands shaking as I picked up the old will. I folded it carefully as if it were fragile. "I don't need the inheritance," I said, looking straight into Dad's eyes. "But I need to know if your promises ever meant anything." No one answered. Mom started crying, but she said nothing to stop me from leaving. I walked out of the house, my steps heavy. That night, Topeka felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I brought the old will back to my apartment, tucking it into a drawer, not because I wanted the house, but because it was the only proof of a promise that once felt real. From that day on, I was no longer invited to family meetings, no longer asked for my opinion, no longer part of their plans. The money I thought would bring happiness to our family had instead pushed me out of it. The months that followed saw my parents' and Ryan's lives transform so quickly I could hardly keep up. They left Maple Street, the rickety old house with its rusted tin roof and rotting fence, for a luxurious mansion in Overland Park, an upscale neighborhood with pristine cobblestone streets and perfectly manicured trees. I heard from neighbors that Mom cried as they left, not out of nostalgia but out of excitement. "We're finally living the life we deserve," she told an elderly neighbor, her voice brimming with pride. Dad didn't say much, but his eyes lit up as he stepped into the new house, a 3-story mansion with a sparkling pool and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking lush green fields. Dad, Micah Walker, once a man who knew only tractors and worn-out work boots, now drove a flashy red sports car, the kind I'd only seen in commercials. He started collecting expensive watches, which he called heirlooms. I heard he joined an exclusive golf club for the elite, where he bragged about his life-changing opportunity and mingled with people he'd never have dared approach before. Mom, Paisley, transformed into someone else entirely. She ditched her faded floral dresses for designer outfits, went to the spa weekly, and joined high society women's groups in Overland Park. She texted me once, rarely, boasting about a trip to Paris where she saw the Eiffel Tower sparkling under the moonlight. I read the message, gave a faint smile, but felt only distance in my heart. Ryan, of course, was the brightest star in their glittering new world. He started an investment firm, hanging a sleek sign in downtown Kansas City, calling himself a successful young entrepreneur. His social media overflowed with images. Ryan on a yacht, Ryan raising a glass of champagne at a pool party, Ryan in a tailored suit in front of a skyscraper with the caption, "Vision leads the future." He spoke of success and youthful ambition as if he'd built it all himself, not with the $10 million from our parents' lottery win. His posts racked up hundreds of likes, dozens of fawning comments from new friends I knew were only there for the money. They lived a dazzling, extravagant life but never invited me along. Not a single invitation to the Overland Park mansion, not a call to check in, not a text to share their joy. I heard they threw a grand party to celebrate Ryan, the Walker family's great success. Old neighbors said the whole town was invited, from their new elite friends to people who once lived near Maple Street. They set up a white tent in the mansion's yard, hired a live band, and served dishes I'd never heard of. But I didn't get an invitation, not a card, not a message. I stood on the sidelines, a stranger, while my family reveled, indulged, and forgot I existed. They didn't share a single cent of the lottery money with me. $10 million, a staggering sum, flowed through their hands like water into luxury cars, European vacations, designer clothes. But not a dime came my way. I'd hoped just once they'd call me over and say, "Nolan, you've done so much for the family. Here's something to thank you." I didn't need money for cars or trips. I just wanted a sign they remembered the years I sacrificed. But no. They spent as if the money would never run out, and I, who'd once been their pillar, wasn't part of their life-changing dream. I overheard Mom bragging to a neighbor about giving Ryan a $10,000 watch to celebrate his success. I stood there hearing the story, my heart constricting. $10,000, the amount I'd worked a year to cover Ryan's debts, used by Mom for a gift, while I didn't even get a thank you. Every time I scrolled through social media, I saw my family. Mom in a silk dress at a 5-star restaurant, Dad beside his new sports car, Ryan toasting wine at an elite party. They posted about triumphant success and living the dream, but never mentioned me. One of Ryan's posts stopped me cold. The Walker family, from Maple Street to the top. Below was a photo of the three of them, Dad, Mom, and Ryan, smiling radiantly in front of a French chateau. I stared at it, searching for any trace of myself, but there was nothing. Not a word, not a mention. I was the one who kept the Maple Street house from falling apart, paid the utilities, bought Dad's medicine, covered Ryan's tuition. But in their story of the top, I didn't exist. Meanwhile, I lived as I always had. My small Topeka apartment was where I returned each night after long days at job sites. I woke at 5 a.m., put on my worn uniform, drove my beat-up truck to houses, factories, or malls to fix pipes. The work never stopped. A leaking pipe in a basement, a broken faucet at a school, a clogged drain in a restaurant. I worked tirelessly, my hands stained with grease, my back aching when I got home as the city lights came on. My life was simple, repetitive, with no room for grand dreams like Ryan's. I called Mom once, hoping for an explanation, an apology, or just a check-in, but she only said a few curt words. "Nolan, I'm busy. We're planning a trip to Switzerland. You okay?" I said I was fine, though I knew she didn't really care. She hung up, and I didn't call back. I realized I'd been forgotten, pushed to the margins like an old item no longer valued in their new home. The contrast between us grew stark, like parallel lines that never meet. The richer they got, the lonelier I became. The more they flaunted, the quieter I stayed. I kept working, paying rent, buying cheap coffee near job sites. Sometimes I wondered if I was living wrong. Should I be like Ryan, chasing big dreams instead of accepting this simple life? But then I shook my head, telling myself I didn't need those things. I just needed a family. Something I'd lost, not to poverty, but to money. I didn't resent my parents or Ryan. I was just tired, a deep exhaustion beyond the 12-hour workdays. I kept living, kept working, kept my simple rhythm. But every night, lying in my single bed in that small apartment, I heard my heartbeat and asked myself, what do I have left when family is no longer family? That Thursday afternoon, my boss sent me to fix a water leak in the basement of a shopping mall in Kansas City. In the damp, dimly lit basement, I worked diligently for 2 hours, repairing the pipe and preparing to leave. But as I stepped into the grand lobby, surrounded by elegant lighting and the hum of music from the shopping area, I froze. There, amidst the crowd, was Ryan. He stood in the center of the lobby, dressed like a movie star. A crisp white dress shirt, a tailored navy suit, and polished leather shoes gleaming under the lights. Around him was a group of friends, young, stylish people laughing loudly. Ryan was telling a story, his hands gesturing animatedly, a smug smile on his lips. I meant to slip by unnoticed. I knew how I looked. A stained work uniform, sweat-soaked hair, hands still smudged with grease. I didn't belong in this world, his world. But Ryan saw me. His eyes flicked over, then lingered as if he'd spotted something amusing. "Nolan," he called out loudly, his voice echoing through the lobby, drawing the attention of his friends and a few passers-by. I stopped, gripping the handle of my toolbox tightly. "Ryan," I replied, my voice quiet but audible. He strode over, the smile on his face no longer that of a brother but of someone eager to prove something. "Everyone, this is my brother Nolan," he announced, turning to his friends with an exaggerated flourish. "Topeka's plumbing hero." A few giggles rippled through the group. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I stayed silent, trying to hide my discomfort. "Still fixing pipes, huh, bro?" Ryan went on, his tone mocking. "Out here getting dirty every day? Don't you ever get tired of it?" He scanned me from head to toe as if I were a curious exhibit in a museum. His friends laughed louder, a girl in a red dress covering her mouth, her eyes glinting with amusement. I stood there, feeling the floor beneath me crumble. But I said nothing. I'd never been good at fighting back. "You know," Ryan continued, stepping closer, his voice lowering but still loud enough for everyone to hear, "our family doesn't need you anymore. You're stuck doing these odd jobs while we've moved on. Don't you feel outdated? A failure who can't seize an opportunity?" The word failure cut like a knife, sharp and cold. His friends laughed again, louder this time. A few passers-by glanced at me, their eyes a mix of curiosity and pity. Each look felt like a needle piercing my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him I'd paid off his debts, bought Dad's medicine, fixed the roof so Mom wouldn't freeze. I wanted to ask what he'd done these past 10 years besides spend money and show off. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my grip on the toolbox so tight my knuckles turned white. I looked into Ryan's eyes, searching for a trace of the little brother who used to chase me to play basketball. But all I saw was arrogance and distance. "Wish you success," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I turned, quietly gathered my tools, and ignored the laughter and whispers behind me. I walked away through the dazzling lights of the lobby, past the eyes watching me. I didn't belong here, and I didn't need to prove it. Outside the mall, the cold Kansas City air enveloped me. I paused by my truck, taking a deep breath to push away the emptiness crushing my chest. I felt regret for the brother who was once part of me, regret for the family I thought would always be there. I opened the truck door, tossed my toolbox onto the back seat, and drove back to Topeka. The city faded behind me, but Ryan's laughter and the pitying looks of strangers echoed in my mind. I drove through the night back to Topeka, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows across my weary face. Ryan's words, "a failure who can't seize an opportunity," cut into my pride like a knife. I wasn't angry, just hollow and small, humiliated by my own brother. When I reached my dark apartment, I sank onto the couch without bothering to turn on the light. Ryan's laughter still haunted me, and the worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't belong in their world of glittering lights and lavish parties. I was just a plumber, grease-stained, living in a cramped rented apartment. Closing my eyes, I saw the old house on Maple Street, its musty smell and memories of poverty. The only place I'd ever felt I truly had a family. I remembered that house where every winter cold winds seeped through cracked windows, forcing us to huddle under blankets in the living room to stay warm. The tin roof leaked during rain, and as a kid I'd scramble to find buckets to catch the drips. Dad Micah would sit there, his calloused hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, hiding the pain from his old back injury. He used to be a strong man, working tirelessly on the farm, fixing tractors from dawn to dusk. But when he drank, he became someone else. "I'm useless," he'd mutter, eyes red, voice trembling. "But Ryan, he'll do what I couldn't." He pinned all his hopes on Ryan, my smart but stubborn younger brother, whom he believed would make it big for the family. Mom, Paisley, was different. Her gentleness was always tinged with an indescribable sadness. She worked at a grocery store, sewing late into the night to earn extra money, and once collapsed from exhaustion right on the kitchen floor. I was 15, rushing into the living room to find her there, her hands still clutching a needle. Panicked, I called Dad and we took her to the hospital. When she woke, she gave a weak smile and said, "Nolan, you're stronger than me. You can take care of yourself. But Ryan, he's still young, he needs support." I nodded, though I didn't understand why she always put Ryan above me. But I didn't resent her. I just thought, as the eldest, I had to be strong to ease their worries. When I was 18, everything changed. Dad had his accident. A faulty tractor broke his femur and damaged his spine. The hospital became our second home, with bills piling up like a mountain. Mom cried every night, and Ryan, only 12 then, sat silently in the corner, eyes red. I knew what I had to do. I dropped out of school, abandoning my dream of college to take any job I could find. Plumbing, hauling, car washing, to pay for Dad's medicine and Ryan's tuition. Some days I ate only one meal, usually a cheap loaf of bread from the grocery store. My only clothes were worn and patched, used year-round. But I didn't complain. Every time I saw Ryan head to school with his backpack, every time Mom smiled when I handed over money to fix the heater, it felt worth it. I didn't need thanks. Seeing my parents at ease, knowing Ryan had opportunities I never did, made me happy. Even knowing my parents favored Ryan, I never held it against them. I thought it was normal. I was the eldest, I had to sacrifice. Those years were tough, but filled with love. We huddled under blankets, shared watery soup on lean days. Dad patted my shoulder, calling me his pride. Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes, when I paid to fix the leaky roof. Those moments made me believe family was worth everything. But now, sitting in my small apartment, those memories only deepened my pain. I opened the drawer, pulling out the old will, the yellowed paper Mom once showed me, promising the Maple Street house would be mine. I held it, my fingers tracing its familiar folds, and realized they'd forgotten everything. Forgotten the nights I worked to exhaustion, the meals I skipped so Ryan could study, the years I carried the family. Poverty never tore us apart. But when money came, they lost what mattered most: family and gratitude. I folded the will, tucked it back in the drawer, and lay on the bed. Ryan's laughter echoed in my mind, but I didn't cry. I just felt a profound regret, not for my unfinished education, but for the sacrifices that were now just a memory. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but the image of the leaky house on Maple Street pulled me back, reminding me of a family we once had, a family that loved each other before money made it all vanish. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but the memory of the leaky house on Maple Street pulled me back, as if reminding me that my family once existed, once loved each other before money made it all vanish. Ryan's mocking laughter, the pitying looks from strangers at the mall, and the old will in my drawer, they played like an old film looping in my mind. But I didn't let myself drown in that pain forever. I'd learned that if I couldn't change the past, I could still move forward, and life in its own way gave me a chance. A year after the incident at the mall, I was still living the same life, waking early, driving my beat-up truck to job sites, fixing pipes, and returning to my small apartment as the city lit up. The work hadn't changed, but I had. I started noticing the small details in my trade, how an old pipe could tell the story of an entire building, how a single joint could save a system. I wasn't just working for money anymore. I worked to be good, to prove I wasn't the failure Ryan had called me. One afternoon, the company sent me to a large office building in downtown Kansas City. It was a major project, a contract worth hundreds of thousands to maintain the entire plumbing system. I arrived with my familiar toolbox and started work as usual. But a few hours in, chaos erupted. A main pipe in the basement burst, flooding the floor and threatening the building's electrical system. The supervising engineers, dressed in sharp suits and clutching tablets, ran around shouting into radios, but no one could pinpoint the cause. I knelt by the pipe, my flashlight illuminating rusted joints. The roar of rushing water, the engineers' yells, and the pressure of a collapsing contract created a storm-like atmosphere. The lead engineer, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, looked at me with near desperation. "Nolan, do you see anything? If we don't fix this, we'll lose the contract." I didn't answer immediately, focusing on every detail. 10 years of plumbing, of grease-stained hands and sleepless nights guided me now. After a few minutes, I found the issue. An old pressure valve had jammed, causing excessive strain on the main pipe. I quickly proposed a temporary fix, releasing pressure through auxiliary valves and replacing a section of pipe. "We need 3 hours to fix it completely," I said, my voice calm but firm. The lead engineer looked at me half-doubting, but he had no other choice. "Do it," he said. My team and I worked relentlessly. Water sprayed everywhere, my hands froze, but I didn't stop. 3 hours later, the flood ceased and the system stabilized. As I stood, my back aching, the lead engineer clapped my shoulder, a rare smile breaking across his face. "You saved us, Nolan." But it wasn't him who truly noticed me. It was the company's director, Mr. Henderson, a tall man with sharp eyes. He'd watched from the corner the entire time, and when it was over, he called me to his temporary office at the site. "Nolan," he said, his voice deep and weighty, "you're not just skilled, you stay calm under pressure. We need people like you." He offered me a promotion to technical manager, a position with double my current salary and the chance to work on bigger projects. He also introduced me to industry contacts looking for reliable maintenance teams. I stood there, hands still dirty, hardly believing my ears. I managed a quiet "thank you," but inside a spark ignited. For the first time in years, I felt recognized. A few years later, I used my savings from the new job to start my own small maintenance company, Walker Fix. The name was simple but meaningful to me. With just 5 employees, we worked with all our heart. I didn't promise grand things like Ryan did, only reliability. Slowly, clients came, from small restaurants to large office buildings. They called because I never let them down. Each new contract felt like reclaiming a piece of the life I thought I'd lost. During that time, I met Elena. She was an administrator at one of my job sites. Elena wasn't flashy. She had brown hair tied high, a gentle smile, and eyes that shone with sincerity. The first time we talked, she asked about my work, not with casual curiosity but genuine interest. "You must be really skilled to handle such complex systems," she said, and I laughed, feeling at ease for the first time in months. Elena admired my dedication, and I was drawn to her kindness. We talked more, from work stories to small dreams I'd never dared share. 2 years later, we married in a simple ceremony on the outskirts of Topeka. Just a few friends, colleagues, and laughter as we cut a homemade wedding cake. A year after that, Elena gave birth to our daughter, Sophie, with big round eyes like her mother's and a smile that melted me every time. My life now was waking up beside Elena, hearing Sophie babble in her crib, and working days that felt not like a burden but a source of pride. I became a steady man with a small family and a stable business. I stopped caring what my parents or Ryan thought of me. I stopped scrolling through their flashy social media posts. I lived quietly, caring for my new family and working with all the kindness I had. Maple Street, the old Will, and Ryan's insults became distant memories. I'd found happiness, not in money, but in the simplest things. A home, a loving wife, and my daughter's laughter. Every morning I wake up next to Elena, hearing Sophie's babbling from the next room, and I feel that my life, though not glamorous, is complete. My small company, Walker Fix, runs steadily, bringing in a stable income and respect from clients. I no longer dwell on Maple Street, the old Will, or Ryan's insults. My life now is filled with peaceful days, family dinners, and the joy of watching Sophie grow. But life, as it always does, has its own way of pulling me back to the past. 5 years have passed since I left the Kansas City Mall, carrying the sting of Ryan's mockery. In all that time, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, not even a mention on social media. They had vanished from my life, as if I'd never existed. I didn't seek them out, not out of anger, but because I'd learned that sometimes letting go is the only way to keep your heart from breaking. But one early autumn afternoon, as I sat in the small office of Walker Fix reviewing a new contract, my phone rang. It was Linda, an old neighbor from Maple Street. Her voice trembled over the line as if she were holding back something heavy. "Nolan, do you know what's happening with your family?" she asked. I frowned, a sinking feeling rising in my chest. "No, ma'am." "What's going on?" She sighed, then told me a story I never could have imagined. Ryan, the successful young entrepreneur with his flashy social media posts, had fallen into deep trouble. His investment firms, built on our parents' lottery winnings, were under investigation for financial fraud. The partners who once fawned over him when he spent freely began pulling their money out. His cash flow froze, and debts surfaced like cracks in a dam. Local papers ran sensational headlines about the young entrepreneur and his fall from grace. I sat there listening to Linda, feeling like I was watching a movie whose ending I'd predicted. But what stunned me was what happened to my parents. Micah and Paisley, despite knowing Ryan's troubles, blindly trusted him. They sold off items from their lavish Overland Park mansion, from Dad's collectible watches to Mom's designer clothes. Mom even sold her wedding ring, the one she'd sworn to keep until her dying day. They took out bank loans, mortgaged the house, and funneled money to Ryan, hoping he'd weather the crisis. "Ryan will figure it out," Linda recounted Mom saying, her voice bitter. They believed he was the family's savior. But just months later, Ryan vanished. The news reported he'd fled the state, taking what remained of the money, the funds our parents had poured into saving him. No explanation, no apology. He left them drowning in debt, with unpayable bills and a mansion now an empty shell. Dad, unable to bear the shock, suffered a mild stroke. He spent weeks in the hospital, his speech slurred, his once calloused hands trembling, unable to hold a glass of water. Mom broke down mentally, no longer the woman who bragged about Paris trips. She grew quiet, her eyes vacant, as if all hope had been drained. They were forced to sell the mansion to cover part of the debt, but it wasn't nearly enough to offset Ryan's damage. The elite friends, the high society women's groups, the people who flocked to them when they won the lottery, all turned their backs. No one wanted to be tied to a family mired in scandal. Friends, relatives, those who once visited Maple Street to celebrate the win were nowhere to be found. My parents, from the heights of wealth, plummeted to the depths of loneliness and illness. When Linda finished, I sat still, phone in hand, my mind blank. I didn't feel hatred, not really. Just a deep bitterness, as if every warning I'd given years ago, about being careful with money, about not entrusting everything to Ryan, had come true. I remembered trying to advise them, only to be brushed off as too conservative, lacking ambition. "Ryan understands the times better than you," Dad had said. And now Ryan was gone, leaving them in the wreckage of a dream they thought would last forever. I didn't call my parents or seek them out, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to face them. In my heart, they were still my parents, but they were also the ones who erased me from their lives, who chose Ryan over me. I went home, held Sophie close, listening to her giggle as I told her about fish in a lake. Elena watched me, her gentle eyes reading my thoughts. "You okay?" she asked, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I nodded, smiled, but inside I knew I wasn't. That night I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. Images of my parents flashed in my mind. Dad with his trembling hands, Mom with her vacant eyes. I thought of Maple Street when we were poor but had each other. I thought of the old will, the promise that I was their pride, and I thought of Ryan, the brother once at the center of our family, now gone, leaving my parents in ruins. To me, this collapse wasn't just about money. It was the cost of greed, of misplaced trust, of chasing fleeting glamour while forgetting what mattered most: family. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but the bitterness lingered in every breath. My parents believed money could buy happiness. Now they faced the truth that money not only failed to buy happiness but tore our family apart. And I, the one pushed aside, could only watch, my heart heavy with both pain and emptiness. In the days following Linda's call, I tried to return to my routine. I woke early to take Sophie to preschool, laughed with Elena in the kitchen as she brewed coffee, and signed new contracts for Walker Fix. But every night when Sophie was fast asleep and Elena curled up beside me, I thought of my parents. Once my entire world, now just faint shadows in my memories. I didn't hate them, but the bitterness lingered like an old scar aching when the weather turned. My life now was a string of peaceful days. Sophie, with her big round eyes and radiant smile, was my light. Elena, with her gentleness and patience, was my anchor. My small company, Walker Fix, grew steadily, not because of its size, but because of the trust I built with every client. I stopped scrolling through Ryan's flashy social media posts or searching for my parents' names in the news. I'd learned to let go, not because I stopped loving them, but because I needed to protect the happiness I'd found. But one early autumn afternoon, as golden leaves fell on the quiet street outside our home, the past came knocking. I was on the living room floor playing with Sophie's wooden puzzle. She giggled, trying to fit a star-shaped piece into place while I pretended to fail just to make her laugh. The doorbell rang, a sharp sound cutting through the warm atmosphere. Elena, baking in the kitchen, called out, "Honey, can you get the door?" I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans, not thinking much of it. But when I opened the door, I froze. There stood my parents, Micah and Paisley. They were no longer the people from my memories, the ones who'd stood in their lavish Overland Park mansion boasting about European trips and sports cars. Dad, his hair now fully white, his face gaunt, clutched a tattered cloth bag with trembling hands. Mom, her hair disheveled and eyes red from hours of crying, looked like she'd aged a decade. They stood there, small and fragile, like ghosts under the fading sunset. I said nothing, just stared, feeling time rewind to the Maple Street days, then fast forward to the night they erased me from their will. "Nolan." Mom spoke first, her voice trembling, breaking. We're sorry. Can we talk?" Dad didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on his worn shoes as if ashamed to be at my doorstep. I nodded, opening the door wider, but inside a storm surged. "Come in," I said evenly, trying to stay calm so Sophie wouldn't sense anything wrong. They stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to intrude. Sophie looked up, curious about the strangers, but Elena quickly scooped her up and took her to another room, leaving me with my parents in the quiet living room. I offered them a seat on the old couch, but they stood, clutching the ragged bag as if it were their last possession. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already suspected part of the answer. Dad cleared his throat, but his voice was weak, lacking the strength of the man who once worked on the farm. "Ryan, he's gone, Nolan," he said, eyes still on the floor. "He took all the money and left us with nothing but debt. The apartment we rented, they evicted us. We have nowhere to go." Mom burst into sobs, her choked cries piercing my heart. "Nolan, please," she said, stepping forward to grab my hand. "Help us, just this once. We just need a place to stay. Just temporary." I stood still, her cold hand in mine. Her plea cut open an old healed wound, sharp but not angering. I felt only a deep pain mingled with exhaustion. I looked at Dad, the man who once called me his pride, now unable to meet my eyes. I looked at Mom, who'd promised the Maple Street house would be mine, now begging me like a stranger. 5 years ago, they'd pushed me out of their lives, chosen Ryan, erased me from their will. And now, with everything in ruins, they came to me. I said nothing, walking silently to the bedroom. I opened the drawer and took out the old will, the yellowed paper with familiar creases in Mom's handwriting. It had been a symbol of trust, love, the promise that I was part of the family. I held it, my fingers tracing the lines, memories flooding back like a tidal wave. The nights I worked to exhaustion to pay Ryan's debts. The meals I skipped to buy Dad's medicine. The times Mom hugged me saying I was the strongest person she knew. And then the night they placed this will on the table saying I was grown, able to fend for myself, and gave everything to Ryan. I returned to the living room, the will in my hand. My parents looked at me, their eyes a mix of hope and fear. I placed the paper on the table before them. "This was your promise," I said, my voice low but clear. "That I was your pride, that I deserved it all. But you chose differently." I picked up the paper, looked them in the eyes, and slowly tore it into pieces. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the silence like a final verdict. Mom sobbed, covering her face while Dad bowed his head, his shoulders trembling as if holding back tears. "Nolan, you," Mom choked out, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "I forgive you," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I truly forgive you because holding on to hate would only hurt me more. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And from today, there will be no more support, no more saving." They stared, stunned. Dad finally looked up, his eyes red. "Nolan, we're your parents," he said, his voice breaking. I nodded. "You are. But you chose Ryan, and now Ryan's gone. I can't fix what you broke." I picked up my phone and called a senior support center in Topeka I knew through a client. I explained the situation, and they agreed to provide my parents a temporary place to stay. I gave them the address, called a taxi, and watched them walk out. Mom clutched the tattered bag, sobbing, while Dad moved slowly, each step heavy. As the door closed, I stood still, feeling both relief and pain. The sound of tearing paper echoed in my mind, a final declaration, not just of lost trust, but of the consequences that had come. As the door closed behind my parents, I stood frozen in the hallway, the sunset filtering through the window, painting the floor gold. Sophie ran to me, hugging my legs, her voice bright. "Daddy, let's play more." Elena stood at the kitchen doorway, her eyes gentle but worried. I smiled, lifted Sophie, hiding the storm of emotions still churning in my chest. I had forgiven them, but that forgiveness didn't erase the scars. I knew that from now on, my life and my parents would be two paths that no longer crossed. After that encounter, I heard they moved to a senior support center in Wichita. It was a modest place with small rooms, regular meals, and elderly residents quietly waiting out their days. I didn't visit, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to face them. Through old acquaintances in Topeka, I learned that Dad, Micah, was quieter than ever. He'd sit by the window staring at the center's small courtyard, his eyes empty as if searching for something lost. They said he no longer spoke of his farm days, of Ryan, or of dreams of striking it big. There was only silence, and in that silence I knew he carried a heavy regret for pushing me out of the family, for placing his trust in the wrong person. Mom, Paisley, grew weaker. Her health declined after years of stress, after the shock of losing Ryan and their fortune. She sent me a few letters written in a shaky hand on cheap paper mailed from Wichita. They didn't explicitly apologize, but every line was steeped in regret. "Nolan, I think of you every day," she wrote in one. "I wish things had been different." I read them but didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know what to say. An apology, however sincere, couldn't erase the years I was forgotten. Her final letter arrived on a winter morning as light snow fell outside my window. I opened it, reading each line slowly. "Nolan, My greatest regret isn't losing the money, but losing the son I loved most. You were always my pride. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I love you." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the torn pieces of the old will. I didn't cry, but my chest felt heavy. I knew she meant it, but the truth came too late. Ryan vanished completely. Rumors said he was arrested in another state for fraud, but no one knew for sure. Some claimed he was living under a new name, chasing more risky ventures. To me, Ryan's name was just a faded scar in my memory. No longer painful, but never fully gone. I didn't look for him or try to reach out. Ryan had chosen his path, and I'd learned I couldn't save those who didn't want saving. Meanwhile, my life went on, peaceful and fulfilling. Walker Fix, my small company, grew in trust. From small contracts, I started getting offers from major businesses in Kansas City. Office buildings, hotels, even a large hospital. I didn't chase lucrative deals or promise beyond my ability. I worked with the same dedication I always had, and that earned me a reputation Ryan, with all his money and flashy words, never achieved. I lived with Elena and Sophie in a modest house on the outskirts of Topeka, with a small garden full of daisies and the sound of children's laughter every afternoon. Sophie, now older, loved running through the yard, chasing butterflies or lying on the grass as I told her stories. Elena remained my rock, her gentle smile and boundless patience unwavering. She never asked about my parents or Ryan, but I knew she understood the wounds I kept hidden. "You're the strongest person I know," she once said, and those simple words were enough to keep me going. I kept my simple lifestyle, unchanged despite my growing business. My old truck still took me to job sites, my stained uniform still my companion. I didn't need fancy cars, mansions, or lavish trips. My happiness was in the evenings with Elena, listening to Sophie talk about her school day, or the times we baked together, flowers smudged on our faces. Those were moments no money could buy. Sometimes I drove past Maple Street, the old neighborhood where I grew up. The house had new owners, freshly painted, the rotting wooden fence replaced with gleaming steel. I'd stop looking through the car window, but I no longer felt resentment, only nostalgia, like a traveler glancing at an old path. I remembered the nights when wind whistled through cracked windows, the meager meals we shared, and Mom's smile when I brought money home. But I also remembered the night they placed the old will on the table, erasing me from their future. Those memories no longer hurt. They were just a story that had ended. I understood not everyone gets a second chance. My parents lost everything, not just money, but family, gratitude, and trust. Ryan chose a path of deceit, and now he was just a name in my past. But I chose differently. I didn't let hatred ruin the rest of my life. My greatest fortune wasn't Walker Fix's success or the big contracts. It was learning to let go, to live with a free heart. The Walker family's story closed in silence, a harsh reminder that money can buy many things, luxury cars, mansions, glittering trips, but it can never buy back lost family. I stood in my garden watching Sophie play under the sun and knew I'd found what mattered most. A true family, one that needed no promises or wills to prove its worth. I stood in the garden watching Sophie chase butterflies under the sunlight, knowing I'd found the most precious thing. A true family, one that needed no promises or wills to prove its worth. Golden leaves fell gently on the grass, the autumn breeze carrying a soft chill. And Sophie's clear laughter rang out like a healing melody. Elena stepped out from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee, her smile as warm as morning light. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, handing me a steaming mug. I smiled, shaking my head. Just grateful. But inside, I knew I was thinking of more than that. I was reflecting on my long journey, the pain, the betrayal, and the harsh lessons life had taught me. The story of me, of the Walker family, wasn't just a tragedy of money and betrayal. It was a bitter reminder of the limits of filial duty and the devastating power of greed. I once believed family ties were unbreakable, that blood was an unshatterable bond. I lived by that belief through my youth, when I dropped out of school to work, when I skipped meals to pay Ryan's debts, when I fixed the leaky roof so my parents wouldn't face winter's cold. I thought that if I sacrificed enough, family would always be my home. But life showed me a cruel truth. When people lose their morals and gratitude, even the strongest blood ties can snap. I remember the early days after my parents won the lottery. $10 million, a number that felt like a dream, a promise of happiness and ease. I was genuinely happy, believing they'd finally escape years of struggle. But money, I came to realize, didn't just bring opportunity, it exposed people's true natures. Dad, who once took pride in me, grew distant and harsh, as if my sacrifices were a burden he refused to acknowledge. Mom, with her dream of making it big, placed all her faith in Ryan, seeing him as the guiding light while I was cast into shadow. And Ryan, the brother I protected, turned into an arrogant man who humiliated me in front of a crowd to cement his own status. I used to ask myself, did money change them? But the more I thought, the more I realized money didn't warp people. It merely revealed their hidden corners. Money was a mirror, reflecting clearly what they chose to become. My parents chose to believe Ryan's empty promises, to distance themselves from me because I was too conservative, too outdated. Ryan chose glamour, lavish parties, and ultimately to flee with the last of the money, leaving my parents in ruins. They weren't ruined by money, they ruined themselves. Sitting in the garden watching Sophie chase a butterfly, I thought about my decision to forgive. That day when my parents stood at my door, gaunt and desperate, I chose to tear up the old will. Not out of revenge, but to sever the final thread of the past. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't weakness. It was my way of freeing myself from resentment, of moving forward unburdened by pain. I didn't forgive because they deserved it. I forgave because I deserved a peaceful life. But forgiving didn't mean forgetting. I didn't forget the years I worked to exhaustion, the night they placed the old will on the table and said I was grown, able to fend for myself. I didn't forget Ryan's laughter in the mall lobby or the pitying looks from strangers. Those memories were part of me, but I learned not to let them define me. I chose to let go, not to save them, but to save myself. Through that journey, I learned that kindness only matters when paired with clarity. I once loved my family unconditionally, believing sacrifice was the only way to prove love. I dropped out of school, worked day and night, and put my needs last so my parents and Ryan could have a better life. But that blind kindness cost me myself. If I'd been wiser, if I'd set boundaries, perhaps I wouldn't have carried such deep wounds. Love, I realized, doesn't mean giving everything. It's mutual respect, trust built on gratitude and sincerity. Ultimately, I saw a simple but harsh truth. Family isn't defined by blood. My parents were blood, Ryan was blood, but they chose to push me out of their lives. My true family I found in Elena, who stood by me with gentleness and patience, and in Sophie, who made me smile even on the darkest days. Family is those who respect me, trust me, and build a future with me, not on empty promises or fragile wills. If I had a message for the world, it would be, don't let money make you forget those who stood by you in hardship. For when trust is lost, no wealth can buy it back. I lived through the lean days when we huddled under blankets to stay warm on Maple Street. I lived through the painful days when my family turned their backs for $10 million. And I lived to see that while money can buy luxury cars, mansions, or lavish trips, it can never buy back lost family. I stood, stepped into the garden, and lifted Sophie onto my shoulders. She laughed loudly, reaching for the falling golden leaves. Elena stood beside me, holding my hand, and in that moment I knew I had everything I needed. The Walker family's story had ended, but mine continued, a story of forgiveness, resilience, and learning to live for myself.